Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are taking a deep, fascinating biological journey into one of the most formidable health challenges in human history. We're talking about cancer. We're going to completely unmask malignancy, looking at everything from that exact microscopic moment a normal cell transforms, all the way to how modern medicine is actually achieving clinical cures.
But before we look under the microscopic hood, just consider this staggering statistic. Over 1 million. That is the number of new cancer cases reported annually in India alone. It's an immense figure, right? And it instantly establishes the massive scale and absolute urgency of this worldwide threat. It's definitely a disease that strikes fear into the hearts of many, and honestly, that is exactly why we need to shine a massive spotlight on it. Knowledge is, for sure, our very first line of defense.
So, to make this super accessible, we're breaking our source material down into 5 logical steps today. First, the scale of the threat. Second, when cells go rogue. Third, triggers of transformation. Fourth, unmasking the enemy. And finally, the arsenal against cancer.
Part 1. The scale of the threat, a global health challenge. Like we just saw, this is a truly massive, worldwide issue, so we really need to understand what we're up against before we zoom in.
Which brings us to Part 2, when cells go rogue, the biology of malignancy. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to break down the core biology of how perfectly healthy tissue actually becomes diseased.
You know, at its very foundation, cancer is basically a problem of regulation. Normal, healthy tissues follow these really strict social rules, and the absolute most important one is called contact inhibition. Think of it as a built-in, natural regulatory mechanism. When healthy cells touch each other, they get a biological signal that literally says, hey, stop growing. They play nice, they respect their boundaries, and that prevents them from proliferating out of control. Well, cancer actually kicks off when cells lose this exact ability. The regulatory mechanisms just go awry, the cells completely ignore the stop signs, and they just keep dividing. And it's that unregulated division that ultimately gives rise to tumors.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between the two main types of tumors that can form from all that unregulated division. On one hand, you've got benign tumors. These are relatively well-behaved, they're typically localized, they stay in their own lane, causing minimal harm to surrounding tissues, and most importantly, they do not spread. But malignant tumors, those are the true danger. These guys are composed of highly aggressive neoplastic cells. They don't respect tissue borders at all, they invade nearby tissues, and even worse, they have the ability to actually break away from the main group.
And that breaking away process, that brings us to a frankly terrifying definition: metastasis. This is literally the ultimate breaking of cellular rules. Metastasis is the process where those aggressive neoplastic cells detach from the original tumor, hitch a ride through the body's systems, and form brand new tumors in completely different, totally new locations. It's this specific rogue capability that makes fighting cancer such a complex and incredibly formidable battle.
Moving on to Part 3. Triggers of transformation. What causes cells to change? Let's look at what actually triggers these normal cells to transform into these rogue rule breakers in the first place.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can clearly group these triggers, scientifically known as carcinogens, into 3 main threats: physical, chemical, and biological. First up are physical agents. Think ionizing radiation from X-rays, or even UV light from the sun. These actually cause physical DNA damage that leads to oncogenic or cancer-causing changes. Then we have chemical agents. Tobacco smoke is the prime offender here, notoriously causing lung cancer by literally introducing harmful chemicals right into the tissue. And finally, there's the biological dimension. It's wild to think about, but certain viruses actually harbor specific genes that can induce cancer when they infect our cells. All right, Part 4, unmasking the enemy, diagnosing the threat. Let's shift gears from how the disease starts to how modern medicine actually tracks and unmasks this hidden enemy. Let's move to and see how this builds through the logical diagnostic pathway. Step 1 usually kicks off with routine blood tests. These might actually indicate the presence of certain cancers through specific markers. Now, if something looks a bit suspicious there, we elevate to Step 2, imaging. This is where incredible tech like CT scans and MRIs come in, allowing doctors to clearly visualize internal organ structures and actually pinpoint tumors hiding inside the body. Finally, if a tumor is spotted, we reach Step 3, the biopsy. This involves physically removing a piece of that suspect tissue so it can be examined super closely under a microscope.
And the absolute biggest takeaway here? Early detection is critical. The earlier we find these rogue cells, the way more effective our intervention is going to be. And while things like imaging and blood tests are fantastic non-invasive tools, the biopsy really remains the definitive cornerstone technique. It's the gold standard for clinical diagnosis, mainly because it lets doctors definitively confirm, right there under a microscope, exactly what type of neoplastic cells they're dealing with.
Which leads us to Part 5, the arsenal against cancer, strategies for clinical cure. It's time to shift from the disease's attack to our medical counterattack.
Modern medicine fights back with a seriously empowering arsenal. First, we've got surgery, which is physically and directly removing tumors from the body. Then there's radiation therapy, firing highly targeted energy to literally destroy those localized cancerous cells. We also use chemotherapy, employing potent systemic drugs to hunt down and kill cancer cells, though as we know, that one can have pretty significant side effects since it impacts healthy dividing cells too. And finally, immunotherapy. This is an absolutely brilliant frontier where we actually harness the body's own immune system, basically training it to recognize and attack tumor cells naturally. How cool is that?
So the crucial point is that oncologists rarely rely on just one of these weapons. Most cancers benefit heavily from a multimodal approach. That basically means strategically combining surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy together for vastly better outcomes. Because by attacking the tumor from multiple angles, physical removal, targeted energy, and systemic drugs, we drastically improve the chances of a clinical cure and just much better management of the disease.
By truly understanding the biology of cancer, from its microscopic origins to these advanced treatments, we totally empower ourselves and our healthcare providers in this fight. But I want to leave you with one final provocative question. We understand how healthy cells go rogue. We know exactly what the physical, chemical, and biological triggers are. But are we doing enough to avoid those triggers in our daily lives? Understanding cancer is step one, but personal prevention? That is where our true power lies. So take this knowledge, use it to empower your health, and stay curious.